Well, now it is with great honor that I will introduce the next two people coming to the stage. Nia Malika Henderson, who will be doing the conversation with Justice O'Connor, is a senior political reporter at CNN and frequent panelist. You might have seen her in Inside Politics, The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and CNN Tonight. She will lead, as I said, the conversation with a lady who clearly needs no introduction. Obviously, you know about her J job. I will tell you, after having had the honor of serving on the ICivics board with her, she has a true passion, not just for the work she does all day long, but for the advocacy of equality in education. And she really pushes ICivics and our board to make sure we're looking all the time at whatever innovation we're exploring, that it really be something that will promote an equal democracy. So without further ado, I'll invite Nia and Justice Sotomayor to the stage.
I want to talk just briefly, kind of give you a sense of what's going to happen here. We'll have a conversation for about 10 or 15 minutes. A couple of questions, and then Justice Sotomayor loves to go out into the crowd and interact with the crowd. She'll take some questions, and so that'll be fun, a little crowd surfing. But we want to start, I just want to kind of first start with the kind of big picture of the how and the why of you being here. Your participation in ICivics, you joined the board in 2015. It's an organization founded by a former Supreme Court justice and now being championed by another. Why did you want to get involved in civics education? What has it meant to you? And why is the Supreme Court and your work at the Supreme Court a good platform for talking about civics education?
It's a lot of questions.
It is.
Let me start with how I became familiar with ICivics, and it was because of my my former colleague or current colleague, because she's still with us, Sandra Day O'Connor. I graduated from law school in 1979. And when I graduated from law school, there were no women on the Supreme Court, no women on the highest court of New York State, and I don't believe of any other state in the Union. My idea of a career was to be a working lawyer, and I had no real expectation or understanding that I could do more than just be a lawyer, until Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed to the court in 1980. And she became my hope, that I could do more in the law than I ever imagined. And she, having served in the state legislature, on state court, in the federal system, she became a voice not just for women, but for the belief that we could become an equal society, that it took hard work, that it took involvement, and that it took caring about that principle and doing something about it. And she lived her entire life doing something about it. And ICivics was a continuation of that belief by her. That's why she helped create it. And I could think of no better legacy that she's left than that one. She's done so many other things, has affected so many areas of the law in such positive ways. But the one that will live the longest is her work on the ICivics organization. And to the extent that I could continue that legacy and help it grow even more, and perhaps expand its reach, that's why I joined ICivics. One of my first initiatives with ICivics that's been fully supported by the board completely is to try to figure out a way to make the games that ICivics promotes more accessible to English as a second language students and to students with reading disabilities. And the ICivics is now very actively involved in figuring out how to do that. There was a meeting of experts that it hosted last May. We're working on changes to the programs of the ICivics games to try to make them accessible to that part of the population. when you know that at least a third of most students in public schools are students struggling with learning English, then you understand the importance of this initiative.
And you spend a lot of time in schools, engaging with kids. I know you were famously on Sesame Street at least 2 times. One with Abby Kadabi.
Yes.
Another time, I think you settled a case between Baby Bear and Goldilocks. And I wonder what you were.
And I got a
learning.
lot of criticism for both shows.
I thought it was you. I thought
There
you
were a lot of mothers who were angry that I disappointed their young girls from believing that they could grow up and be princesses.
right because
or
that's
should.
what. Yeah, because that's what Abby
I
Kadabi
got-
wanted to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I got a lot of criticism from lawyers that playing that part in settling the case with Goldilocks and
Right.
the bears, that I unrealistically sought a compromise, which is not what courts do.
Right.
That criticism has a lot of
Yeah.
legitimacy.
Okay, that's interesting. So what are you learning when you go into schools? I thought you were great, and I thought you settled it in the way it should be settled. So I wonder
That's
what
what
you-
most lawyers should be doing. Maybe not
settling
judges.
cases.
Yes.
So I wonder what you learn when you are talking to students, when you go into schools. What are you learning about what they know about civic education? What don't they know? Sort of what are the gaps? And sort of how do they view that? And how do you feel like they can become more engaged? Or the things that you're seeing that can engage them more?
Well, I don't know if my visiting with students teaches me about what they don't know. Because thankfully, by my being present, more often than not, teachers are actually doing study plans with their kids before I arrive that engages them in discussions about the court and its role in our democracy. So I provide, thankfully, a platform for teachers to have lessons around that topic. And so the kids probably know more because I'm coming than they might if I didn't come. And so to me, that's part of the importance of the role I serve, which is to stimulate these kinds of conversations in schools, some of which might not otherwise engage in them. Look, I don't just visit inner city schools, but I do an awful lot of that. And I visit places where most justices might not otherwise go. So I've been to Head Start programs, nursery schools. I go to middle schools and high schools and colleges and law schools and professional schools of all kinds. I go where there's an audience that might be inspired by listening to me talk about the importance of their involvement in community building. Because that's what civics is about. That's what law is about. That's what government's about. It's about regulating our relationships with each other. And that is, we think of that sometimes as morality. Thou shalt not do a certain number of things to another person. But morality plays one role, and it's greater than law, because law only sets a minimum standard of how we treat each other. But that minimum is so critical to how we interact with one another and how we help one another. And that issue is one where we have to become involved in order to create the more perfect union. Without it, we never will. And so for me, civic education is the key to inspiring kids to want to become and stay involved in making a difference.
And how do you see, I know as a child you read a lot, you had the Encyclopedia Britannica delivered to your house.
My mom
and so
did that.
Your mom. And I wonder if you could talk about how you see news literacy fitting into civic education.
Well, that's interesting, and I've never been asked that. One of the things that I was privileged as a child to see was that both my mother and my father read the newspaper. Now, they didn't read the New York Times. My father read El Diario La Prensa, which was the Spanish newspaper in New York. It still is, and probably in other parts of the country. My mother did read the Daily News and the New York Post, and perhaps not the New York Times, but they were avid newspaper readers. Um, less, well, probably for lots of different reasons. Neither of them watched the news on TV. But I don't think the TV was as an important an instrument of news reporting back then as it's become now. I think most news, most people got from newspapers back then. I think we've lost something significant in the absence of that. I don't mean to complain about your medium.
You would never do that.
But, you know, television is sound bites. And sound bites have the danger of cutting off important discussions that require in-depth consideration of issues. And so for me, one of the things that I promote a great deal is reading. And reading means reading for purposes both of fun and for information, because information gives you life possibilities. I tell kids that what books did for me as a child growing up were to teach me that there was a world bigger than the one I lived in, that there were possibilities in my life that I didn't and couldn't have ever imagined without books and reading. And so those issues of civic literacy, but literacy in general, go hand in hand in my mind. That's why my message is often to kids, the two are combined intimately.
One of the things, and this is my last question, I'm going to go to the audience after that, so I hope you guys are ready. One of the things that some of the data out of this conference is showing is that increasingly people, when they disagree with someone, they also dislike them. How do you, I mean, that seems like a fundamental obstacle to the sort of things that build civic education and civic literacy, like associations. So how do you kind of combat that notion that not only do people disagree, they also are distrustful and dislike people that they disagree with?
I'm often asked how on the Supreme Court we manage to maintain civility despite the fact that we are very different at moments in our rulings. And my answer always is because we start from the premise that we are people of good faith, equally committed, equally passionate about, equally dedicated to this country, our Constitution, and our system of government. I know that no matter how much I disagree with my colleagues, that we are equally in love with those principles. And we may disagree on the best way to effectuate and improve those principles and what to do to make those principles stronger. But that disagreement is not from a lack of good faith. If you can start there, if you can look at another person and understand that no matter how much you disagree with them, if you look, you will find good in them. You know, I have friends from every political spectrum in the country. And the ones that are my friends have some fundamental values. They are good people. They are kind people. They are giving people. They care about the world. They do things in the world to improve it. I may disagree with some of their political views. I may disagree with how they're doing things. But I know that those fundamental values we share. So if I could teach every kid in the world not to look at the negative, but to look at the positive in every person they know, not only will they find themselves liking more people, but more people will like them. And that, I think, is what we forget, which is to the extent that you live by stereotypes and reject a class of people because of those stereotypes, if that's the practice that you're engaged in and the other person is doing the same, we lose out in having a world of people like us. I like Republicans when they come up to me and say, "You're not a Republican, but I still like you."
Oh, that's great. So I want to go and see, I'm sure there are questions
All
out
right.
here.
As you may know, some of you may know, I like walking around. I have a lot of energy and I like meeting people. But my security people get upset if you get up unexpectedly. So if you just let me walk and you not get up, they'll be happier. How's that? All right. I'm going to start at this end of the room and make it that way.
Are there students over here? Because I want to make sure we get students involved.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go, Kelly?
Okay.
Kelly Hernandez, I'm going to go to you for your question.
Now, Kelly, where are you?
She's here in the blue shirt.
Oh, thank you. You can get up if they call you. That they expect. Hello, Kelly. What do you do, Kelly?
I'm a student at Wilson High School.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here.
No problem. The last time I met you, I was in 4th grade.
Oh my gosh. You forgive me for not recognizing you now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm now a graduating senior this year.
Congratulations. You going on to college?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Okay, so my question to you is, I'm also a Latina woman who hopes to one day join the political realm. What should our country do to make government more inclusive and representative of our diverse country?
Well, I can talk about what government should do, but government doesn't do. People do. And it's people who make laws. It's people who change laws. It's people who make things happen. So my question is, what are you going to do to make the government more responsive? Because it won't change unless we change it. I'm doing what I can. I'm here. And I'm here talking to you, and I'm here everywhere I can to talk to people about getting involved. And so for me, because I can't be political, I can't go out there, and because the judge's rules say I can't lobby politicians, I can't do things like that. So I do what I can. So the issue is, where are the areas that you want the government to be more responsive? It's your voice I need to hear. And it's your voice they need to hear. So I'm not trying to evade your question. I think there are many more programs that the government should be supporting and participating in. Look, the rising cost of college today is not just strangling people of color like us, but it's strangling everybody. So government has to be looking at that. Obviously, the more economically challenged you are, the harder it is to go on to higher education and make something of yourself. But we need to work on that issue as a country, because otherwise, if we fall behind in our academic strength, we're going to fall behind in our world strength. So that's an issue that we have to do. We do still have to consider how to promote people like us into believing that we have a shot at a fair education. And government can do more in that as well. But my main message is, you tell me what you're going to do, okay?
All right, so do we have any more students on this side? Students.
All right.
Go to-
Hello. I'm going to walk around and then come back and hug you on my way over, okay? Hello. Tell me your name.
Yep.
So my name is Haddad.
Hello, Haddad.
Yeah. And I'm also a student from Woodrow Wilson High School, and I'm a senior. Yeah.
Congratulations. You going to college too?
Yes, I'm going to
All
college.
right. There always better be a yes after that, okay?
So I just have a question. Is that being a judge for a while, have you come and see and decide things more in black and white, or every cases have a gray area?
By definition, if you come to a judge, it's a gray area, all right? Because where the law is clear and says what controls your case, you won't go to court. you're going to either admit you're wrong and you're going to pay, or you're not. But if it's black and white, there's very little reason to come to court. Every single case that comes to court, with the few exceptions that are not important for the purposes of our conversation, is because the facts of the case are on the margin of the law. And what you're asking the judge to do is to decide whether those facts go on one side or the other of the law, or the Constitution, or the regulation. So it's always a gray area. And you're asking the judge to figure out what the new boundary of that law is to the facts of your particular case. But that's life. There's very little in life that's black and white. Most choices come with positives and negatives. And in every choice you make, you're giving something up. You're not doing something else. You may help one thing, but by doing that, you're not helping another. The problem that most people have with legal decisions is that most people think that it's black and white. Most people believe that law is clear. That's what they want. That's what your stomach wants, is that certainty, that sense that the law can tell the difference between black and white in an easy way. But once you understand it can't, perhaps you'll be more forgiving when the court makes a decision you don't like. And that's what I beg people to do. You know, often on the news, you'll read about the court deciding an issue. Or even newscasters, sorry, will talk about it. And people will respond by saying either the judges were absolutely right or the judges were absolutely wrong. I ask in a room of lawyers how often and how many people actually read the Supreme Court decisions. So for the people who are not lawyers in this room, how many of you have ever read one of our decisions? Oh, I forget, I'm in a room full of students. All right. But most people don't. And when you do, you can read the majority opinion and you can read the dissenting opinion, and you will see that both sides have strong arguments. You might believe that one side should win for your own sets of reasons, but often there are two sides to that case. So yes, we live in gray. Although all I wear is a lot of black.
Justice, we have another question over here from another student.
I'm going to continue walking this way and then I'll come back. Tell me who you are.
I'm Leone. I'm also from Wilson High School and a senior.
And college, right?
Yes.
Yeah, look. That's the right answer.
I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, but during this unbiased time, what would you say to young people trying to engage meaningfully in heated topics or issues with their peers who may have very different opinions?
Listen before you talk. And that's what lots of people don't do in these heated times. They jump to talking without actually listening and without trying to understand. Because you can't really come to an answer or really come to compromise anything or be willing to unless you can appreciate the other side's viewpoint. Okay? So I'm going to touch on it only broadly and not give an opinion one way or another. The issue of immigration that we're so sensitive about right now. It's a real issue. Why? Because some people feel at risk. If that is what is motivating them, whatever answer we find as a nation is going to have to deal with that too. It's going to have to address it in some meaningful way that will give people some sense of greater security than what they're feeling. And we don't know what that answer is. I don't have one. I have my personal thoughts. But I do know that unless you listen and are willing to understand other people's fears, concerns, what's motivating their reactions, you really can't talk, because you'll be talking past each other, not with each other. And so I ask you to keep an open mind on every issue you consider. Go into it without assuming you know the answer. Listen carefully. Identify what the questions are on each side, what the needs are on each side, and then engage in trying to find an answer that addresses that.
So questions over here?
Yes.
Here. Yeah. I think it's, is it Shalina?
Shalina.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So a lot of people in the panel have talked about the role of teachers
Okay.
in promoting civics education. Can you talk a bit about the role of higher education institutions as well in engaging students beyond K-12, but as they're actually going out and becoming citizens, what's the role of these leaders?
Thank you. I have this conversation all of the time with law students in law schools. You know, we assume that law schools are teaching people about civic education. When I go to meetings, and have in the past, where there are legislators who are lawyers who say to me, why can't the government shut that person up? I keep thinking to myself, did they have a lesson on the First Amendment? We need to do it at every level of education. I'm concentrating because you can't do everything. I tend to concentrate on civic education for middle school and high schoolers, because I think the younger that you catch a student's attention, the better able to build a lifetime habit. Sometimes in colleges and professional schools, it's harder to get people engaged if they didn't start out that way. But I do think you're right, which is we should not be ignoring this issue in every educational setting, because we can't assume that because people are in college that they actually are taking an interest in civic education or have civic knowledge. And so I think every institution is obligated to look at it not just as a subject that a student takes in school, but as an ethos that the school helps create. Schools have to be involved in promoting this as a concept of fundamental education in their schools.
So I realize we haven't heard from any men. It's a rarity, so I'm going to call on.
All right, we got a young
Guy.
man back here.
Yes. He's here, sir? Or, no, oh, okay, yeah, right there. He has a question?
Go ahead.
All right,
Great.
so my name is Jacob.
Hello, Jacob.
I'm a senior at Wilson.
Okay.
I'm going to college. So my question is, as somebody who's under the age of 18 and can't vote, what can me and my friends do to like have an impact on society, since we can't like directly vote for people?
You can write to your congresspeople, you can write to your senators, you can make phone calls, you can get your parents and your neighbors and people who are of age. You can help in voter drives on election day and go out and hold somebody's hand and walk them to the polls. All right? There's so much you can do. You can't pull the lever, but you can get others to pull it for you. So you can go out and lobby and work hard at convincing people of your viewpoint and convince them to do the right thing. You don't have to be any age to do that. So on election day in November, whatever your local elections are, go out and do something about them. Okay?
But you in the back there? Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
So I go to George Mason University. I'm in college. Ooh, go me. But I am from Ibadi in Texas. Up until 9 months ago, I moved up here and I owned a blazer for the first time, so that was cool. But I lived in fear of my life and my family's life, and I was never too certain that I was going to be able to go to college. How can we as people, how can I convince others in this room with our salaries and our blazers and stuff like that? How do we as a people tap into the full intellectual capital of this nation and of the barrios, and how do we get people to care? And how do I help my family?
Yeah. Look, I'm still doing that, but it is generational, and we set examples. When I graduated from college, my cousin and I, Miriam, were the first two college graduates of our family. All of my predecessor cousins had started college and left, or they went 2 years and didn't go any further. I have one cousin who went 3 years and a half and then just didn't get his degree. After us, everybody's gone to college. And everybody's gotten their degree, and I now have third-generation cousins who are children who I know will go to college. We got out of the barrio. But all of us are still involved in our communities, and we set, by you becoming who you are, an example that others will follow. I tell kids of our background all of the time, the first thing we have to do is keep going back. I go back regularly to my high school. When it was still open, it's been closed. I went back to my grammar school, and I talked to the kids there. Not every year, but with great frequency, because I know that one-on-one contact is so important. Now, you're thinking about the bigger things. You're thinking about how do we establish policies that do these things. And you'll find your work in one of those areas, and you'll try to make systemic changes. But we have to do the systemic changes with one-on-one commitment, because it doesn't work just doing it one way. How do we reach out to the people in this room? How do we reach out to our country to understand that it may be bypassing the greatest resource it has, which is the human capital of people, not only who really want to be here, but who really want to contribute. By doing what you're doing, talking about it. And we have to go out and continue delivering the message. We have to continue making people understand that we are wasting so much in not making use of this great strength in this country. Don't give up, Monica. And the blazer befits you. It looks good on you.
We have a question here.
All right.
My name is John. I'm also a senior at Wilson, and my question was, what's the best way for a student to learn about government and civics outside of school?
Oh, how ICivics, the games. They're wonderful games, so you can play them. But actually, I got involved in politics not by my own choice. I was working at a hospital in the South Bronx, and the owner of it was a private hospital. The owner of the hospital was supporting a local candidate to run for mayor. And he offered my services for the summer. So that particular summer, I worked in the office of Herman Badillo, who was the first Puerto Rican to run for elective office in New York. And that exposure that summer gave me my first taste of civics and of the importance of organization and voter drives and all of these issues that have become a part of my lexicon and my living, okay? I would really suggest that you volunteer. Volunteer for some organization, volunteer for some campaign. So, for example, there are voter drives. And in voter drives, you don't have to be one party or another. You're just out there to make sure people get out and vote. And once you start getting involved in something like that, all the people with you are going to be talking about it. They're going to be talking about civics, and they're going to be talking about what makes civics work in communities. And so that's the best way I would learn outside of school. It's the way I started, and it really had a deep impact on me. So good luck.
Thank you.
All righty. This gentleman here, sitting next to Shane Battier.
I'm glad he's sitting. I'm not a Wilson student,
All right, that's,
but I served as a superintendent of Washington, D.C.
ah.
And Wilson, of course, is part of that extended family. I have a question for you that we all have to come to terms with. What would be your message to students, to students who by choice, not aptitude, choose not to go to college right away, or choose a profession that doesn't immediately require it?
And I know people like that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with choice, meaning assuming it's free choice, that it's not being motivated by financial need, that it's not being motivated by laziness, all right? And that it's not being motivated by fear, because there are many kids who don't go to college because they're afraid they don't have the aptitude. So making those assumptions, what I would say is don't give up college. There's always night school, all right? And the reason for college is not financial. The purpose of education as a side benefit gives you greater potential earnings. So there might be some educational opportunities that don't do that, okay? But what college does is you give you knowledge about the world. And that has an intrinsic value that serves you as a human being, no matter what kind of work you're doing during the day. That ability to become a better person, to become a more curious human being, to have more knowledge so that you can act or choose not to act in the world, but by choice, that's the value of education. So for me, I do often talk about the financial benefits of going to college. The statistics on how much college students earn and how much high school students earn, the gap is widening. And I talk about that. But I don't think that that's the real reason to go to college. The real reason to go to college is to become a more interesting person to yourself, to have more participation in the world that's meaningful. You know, I'm not an artist. I can't draw to save my life. I can't sing or can't dance. Can't do any of those things. But I can go into a museum and enjoy art because I took an art course in college. And I have a fundamental understanding of what artists were trying to do during the different periods of artistic history. That gives me pleasure. And so those things are more easily learned in college.
Is it permissible to quote you?
Forever, yes. Everybody else does.
The question was it permissible for us to quote her or myself to quote her.
Absolutely.
Thank
and
you
you
very
don't even
much.
have to give attribution if you're promoting the concept. All right, now I'm
Okay.
going to let you pick because I'm
Okay,
overwhelmed.
is there a question? The mic is over here, so did you have a question?
I did.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm a college student. I go to Georgetown University. And my question is, after we engage in these conversations and we focus on listening, especially in light of a lot of the hate crimes I know have been very prevalent at Georgetown yesterday and the past semesters as well, how do we engage in conversations aimed at telling people they're incorrect?
I'll tell you one thing. Don't do what justices do in writing. And I say that because we're not the fountain of diplomacy in our disagreement. We're sort of, well, sometimes a little too direct with each other when we disagree. There are sometimes intractable positions where someone will look at you and say, it's not because I'm not afraid, or it's not because I'm afraid, it's not because of anything, but I don't like blacks. I don't like Hispanics. I don't like X, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind. Well, the reality is that there's some people's minds you won't be able to change. Some things, and I count among them, racism. If someone is a racist within their stomach, there may be nothing you can say that will change that. So there are some conversations that won't change the problem or for which you can't find a solution. What you have to do is try to find commonality with enough people so that person's voice won't win out. And that's really what we do sometimes. We appeal to the greater good, to the greater sense of right, and we work at sort of igniting that in others, in enough people so that bad won't overcome good. And that's really what we often have to do. We have to engage in appealing to that good in people and reaching out to as many people as we can to convince them of that as being right. That ends up changing the world for the better. Please remember that when Brown versus Board of Education was decided, there were race riots in many cities. There were many schools and districts that resisted integration in an open and notorious way. Everyone's seen the Rockwell picture of that little African-American girl in the white dress who was surrounded by marshals being walked into her school. And yet I dare say today that it is a small minority of people who would disagree with the principle of integration. There's still some out there, but as a nation, we don't hold that value anymore. But it took a lot of conversation, a lot of people doing the right thing, including judges who forced integration despite so many people not wanting it, that it took us generations to get to the point where the vast majority of Americans accept the principle that we should be an integrated country.
Questions? I'm going to go to the gentleman back here.
Okay. And I'm going to go to the young woman who asked me a question, and then I'll come back to you, okay? Because I didn't give her a hug.
You can ask your question as she's
okay.
walking.
So I'm Richard Collenberg. I'm with the Century Foundation, and I went to college in the 1980s. So we've been talking a lot in this conference about the lack of civic literacy and the fact that people can't name the three branches of government. But what to me is new is this lack of faith in democratic institutions, so that now we have 25% of young people saying democracy is a bad or very bad system of government. What do you think we can do about that second issue?
Well, most people who say that don't know what it is. So unless people can speak from knowledge, it's not a conversation that you can change. And so for me, it really is ignorance speaking. Because the choices, and when you present those choices to people, most of the time they back off from that extreme. And so I agree with you that that is exceedingly disturbing, but that's the reason why I'm joining you, okay? What we are doing is trying to increase civic awareness so that people will move away from that view. But you can't do it unless we educate people about what the principles of our system of government are. My former colleague, Justice Scalia, thought that the Federalist Papers should be required reading for every student in the United States. I would like to agree with him. They may be a little too dense for most people, but I think that if we can take those dense papers and distill them into conversations about what motivated the various provisions, what our founding fathers were worried about, what different views they had and how they reached the compromises they did and why, that those conversations will sensitize kids to the importance of our democracy.
Alrighty, questions? Maybe on this side. Where's the microphone? Because I feel like we haven't really paid much attention to this side. So there's a gentleman there who's got his hand up.
Wow. Okay, so my name's Greg Shuck. I'm a doctoral student, so I'm still in the range.
Still in school.
Right. Always in school. So we're here talking about civic literacy, and when you think about what C-SPAN did in terms of expanding people's eyes to how politics and policy gets formed, you know the question I'm going to ask is about the Supreme Court. And how much more we could learn by being able to watch and understand the passion beyond even reading a ruling, because it's not the same.
All right. I'll start from the beginning, okay? The beginning is my confirmation process. When I was on the lower courts, I actually participated in a couple of times experiments that the courts had with televising lower court proceedings. That experience was not necessarily a negative one for me, although I did see the potential for problems in the process. But it wasn't a negative one, so much so that I would have been adamantly opposed to the idea. What started to change my mind is what the cost of C-SPAN has been. And as I went through the nomination process and I started speaking to senators about what they thought had happened to collegiality in the Senate, almost uniformly, every one of them said it was when televisions came into the chamber. Because up until then, they were forced to physically be in the room to listen to one another. And they were forced to be in the room, and by happenstance of the time they walked in, just the nature of the proceedings, they would have to sit next to each other. And they would actually talk to one another. When TVs came into the room, they're all back in their offices. Not one senator that I met with had that television on in his or her space. A staffer was watching it and reporting back what the staffer thought was important to report back, but not one of them was hearing what their colleague was saying. So that began to make me think about whether that public knowledge that people think they have about what happens is actually accurate. Because now not only have they intruded on those prior discussions, but they're still not getting to the back of the room where the real talking is happening. Okay? And so how about the court? So I come to the court and I think, what makes court members less human than other people? Nothing. You got senators who get up and play to the camera. We may have justices who play to the camera. We have senators who don't like playing to the camera and don't. They just enter their vote. We will have justices asking less questions because the cameras are there. And right now, it is a conversation, even though it's being orally recorded, the fact that those oral recordings are not played on television except through C-SPAN, they don't take the headline, because unless they have us actually saying the words that they can show the public, they won't do a clip of it. They'll just talk about it. They won't sort of play the clip. It's a different interaction. Cameras change the institution. And education is not unimportant, but it's not the answer for ensuring that there is actually a discussion going on that can be looked at by others in writing or listening to the radio or putting it on an audio tape if you're really, really interested. But if you're not, is it worth the intrusion on the process? I've sort of moved away from my initial beliefs. I don't think it is worth it.
All right, Justice, we have time for one more question, and here she is.
Hi, Justice Sotomayor. My name is Tanika Clayton, and I work with the New Schools Venture Fund. And it's been over 60 years since Brown v. Board, and I can just say that as someone in the education space, someone who's an activist in the space, as a parent, I'm very frustrated at how segregated schools are now. And it doesn't seem like the trend is turning. It seems like it's becoming more and more segregated. And so while I don't know that there's a legal answer to this, I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on how we should address this.
Well, I don't think the answer is legal. I think the answer is economic. And as the income gap continues to grow, we're going to grow more segregated. Those are the statistics. And so for me, the issue is how to address that problem. It always has been for me through education, because that's the only way we get out. But I agree with you that it's no longer a legal question. It's a societal structure question. And we have to work harder at integrating our neighborhoods more, of integrating our economics more. Until we do that, we're not going to reach integration in schools. I wish I had an easy answer for you. I don't.
All righty. On that note, Justice, thank you so much for sharing so much of your time today, so much of your insight and wisdom and getting out, and I'm sure the students got so much out of engaging with you today. And if we could give another round of applause to the Justice, that would be great.
I challenge every student, not the adults in this group that belong to the various organizations, but all the students who are here, go play the ICivics games. If you get 100% on 3 of the games, you don't have to play anymore. If you don't, then continue playing them, okay?
Yeah, it's a pretty cool game. All righty, so the protocol calls for you leading first, everyone sitting, right, as you leave. I think that's how it is.
I will see you again at my home, the courthouse.
Yes.
So come join the reception there.
Great.
I'll see you there.
Alrighty.
This is how we do it down in Puerto Rico.